Put the thief on her knees, Luca Moretti ordered. Two guards forced Elena Ward down onto the black marble floor of the council chamber. Around her, 12 men who controlled ports, unions, construction firms, and half the city's judges watched without speaking. On the wall behind Luca, a banking screen displayed the number that had condemned her. $18 million, transfer complete. Luca stood at the head of the table, one hand resting beside his pistol. He had trusted Elena with every legitimate company carrying the Moretti name. She knew which contracts concealed bribes, which properties stored weapons, and which council members were secretly drowning in debt. Now the audit trail showed that she had used that knowledge to rob him. Password authenticated, Adrian Moretti announced from Luca's right. Fingerprint confirmed. Her private verification code approved all 12 transfers. Adrian placed a printed security image on the table. It showed Elena entering the financial archive at 2:13 that morning, carrying the encrypted ledger terminal later used to move the money. Luca looked at her with an expression colder than anger. Where is it? I didn't steal your money. One of the guards struck the back of her shoulder. Elena caught herself before her face hit the floor. 20 minutes, Luca said. Return every dollar before midnight, or you won't leave this room alive. A digital clock appeared beneath the missing balance. 001942. Elena stared at the transfer list instead of the gun. Each amount was different. $740,000, $1.26 million, $980,000, but the decimals followed a pattern she recognized. 7 years ago, while investigating a bankrupt pension fund in Baltimore, she had exposed an accountant who divided stolen money using prime number intervals. The method allowed hundreds of transfers to appear unrelated until they were placed in chronological order. That accountant had died in federal custody, yet someone inside the Moretti organization was using his system. Let me touch the keyboard, Elena said. Adrian laughed. So she can erase what remains? Both hands stay visible, Elena replied. One finger. You can shoot it off afterward. Luca studied her for a long moment, then pushed the terminal across the table. Elena entered the first routing number. The account had been closed, but its registration history remained cached inside the Moretti compliance system. She enlarged the creation date. March 14th, 3 months before Luca had hired her. A murmur traveled around the table. That proves nothing, Adrian said quickly. She could have altered the archive. Not this field. Elena pointed toward the gray timestamp. It was imported from the bank during last year's regulatory review. If I changed it, the checksum beside it would break. Luca glanced at his attorney. The man reluctantly nodded. For the first time, uncertainty entered Luca's eyes. Elena used the dormant routing number as a search key. The screen went black. Then one account appeared, followed by another. 12 concealed corporate trusts unfolded across the display, each connected through construction suppliers that existed only on paper. Every trust listed the same authorized beneficiary. Adrian Salvatore Moretti. Chairs scraped backward. 2 council members reached beneath their jackets. Adrian did not retreat. She planted my name because she knew we would discover her theft. Then why were the first 3 trusts created before she worked for us? Luca asked. Because someone recruited her before she entered this family. It was a strong answer. Fast, plausible, and poisonous. Adrian placed a second document before Luca. It was an employment recommendation written by the director of the Baltimore pension fund Elena had investigated. The signature belonged to the dead accountant's former partner. Luca's uncertainty vanished. He lifted his pistol. Elena's pulse hammered, but her voice remained controlled. If you kill me, the final transfer executes automatically. Luca stopped with the barrel level with her forehead. I placed a quarantine instruction inside the transaction chain, she continued. It was the only way to prevent the money from leaving the Moretti network. At midnight, the system will either restore all 18 million or release it to the person holding the succession authorization. Adrian stepped toward her. She's bluffing. Elena looked directly at Luca. Then ask your brother why he scheduled the emergency succession vote for 12:01. Silence swallowed the chamber. Luca slowly lowered the weapon, but there was no mercy in his face. "Seal the building," he ordered. "Disable every elevator, jam every phone, and lock every council member inside. No one leaves before midnight." The steel doors slammed shut. The countdown reached 18 minutes. Then the banking screen changed by itself, revealing a second clock Elena had never programmed. Moretti Succession Protocol, armed. Beneath it appeared a single instruction. Upon Luca Moretti's death, all assets transfer to Adrian Moretti. Luca stared at the succession order while the 12 council members began shouting over one another. Adrian demanded that the system be disconnected, but Elena warned that cutting the power would force the protocol onto the building's emergency server. Luca silenced the room with one strike of his pistol against the table. "Who created this?" he asked. Elena enlarged the authorization history and found the Moretti family seal embedded beneath the code. "Your father established the original protocol 14 years ago, after the assassination attempt in Newark. But the document he signed only transferred temporary command. Someone replaced command with ownership and added your legitimate companies, properties, and private trusts." Adrian leaned across the table, "And only our accountant had access to all of those records." 6 months earlier, Luca would not have known Elena's name if it had not been printed at the bottom of every financial report he signed. She had worked 3 floors beneath his office, in a windowless department where 6 men carried her calculations upstairs and presented them as their own. Luca believed his construction empire survived because Adrian negotiated aggressively, and the executive board obeyed without question. In reality, Elena had discovered that 3 Moretti projects were using the same supplier identification number, stopped a federal tax seizure 47 minutes before the filing deadline, and quietly recovered $9 million from contracts Luca's directors had declared worthless. She never asked for public credit. She asked for accurate records, protected payroll, and enough authority to prevent mistakes from becoming funerals. Adrian had been the first Moretti to notice her. He brought one of her corrected reports into Luca's office and praised her as the only accountant downstairs who understands consequences. 2 weeks later, Luca promoted her and gave her direct access to the family's legitimate holdings. He never asked why Adrian had taken such an interest in an overlooked forensic accountant. He was simply grateful that the green folder appearing on his desk every morning contained the answers before he knew which questions to ask. Elena now pulled that same green folder from the evidence stacked against her. "This is yesterday's asset reconciliation," she said. "Look at the bottom of every page." Luca examined the reports. Each carried Elena's electronic signature. "That proves you certified them." "No, it proves someone wanted you to believe I did." She pointed to a narrow, empty space beside each signature. Every report Elena approved contained a tiny embossed mark produced by the mechanical press locked inside her office. She had created the practice after discovering that digital signatures could be copied. The mark was deliberately mundane. 3 raised dots positioned like the corners of an unfinished square. None of the documents contained it. Adrian seized a page and ran his thumb across the paper. She could have omitted the mark herself. "I could," Elena said, "but the compliance copies filed with the banks contain it. If these versions don't match theirs, someone replaced the reports after Luca signed them." Luca looked toward the council secretary. "Contact the banks. The phones are jammed under your lockdown order," Adrian reminded him, "and the external lines will remain sealed until we know which institutions she compromised." Elena understood the trap immediately. Any evidence outside the building was unreachable, while every record inside it had passed through systems controlled by the person who framed her. The clock dropped below 15 minutes. Luca ordered 2 guards to search Elena's office and retrieve the embossing press. She almost told him it would not be there. At 10:40 that evening, she had returned from the compliance floor and found her desk drawer open by less than an inch. Nothing appeared missing, but the press had been turned, so its handle faced left. Elena always positioned it toward her dominant right hand. She had checked the hallway camera and discovered a 7-minute gap. Before she could alert Luca, his security system recorded her entering the archive with the encrypted terminal. The terminal had not contained $18 million then. It had contained proof that someone was testing dormant accounts. Elena had moved the funds into quarantine because the system administrator monitoring her searches could have released them at any moment. explaining that now would reveal the one safeguard she still controlled. "There's another way to authenticate the reports," she said. "The terminal maintains a local keystroke cache for 72 hours. It records the timing and pressure of every entry, even when the network log is altered." Luca pushed the device toward her. "Open it." Elena entered her recovery phrase. The cache appeared, showing her work from 2:13 that morning. Then, another session appeared directly beneath it. Same password, same verification code, same recorded fingerprint. But the pressure pattern belonged to someone who typed almost entirely with his left hand. Every person in the room looked at Adrian. His left hand rested flat against the table. "Convenient," he said. "She manufactures evidence, then designs it to point at me." The chamber doors opened, and the guards returned carrying Elena's missing embossing press inside a clear evidence bag. Dark red blood covered the handle. Behind them, 2 more guards dragged in Paul Mercer, the junior accountant who had worked beside Elena for 3 years. His shirt was soaked through where a bullet had entered his stomach. He raised his shaking hand and pointed directly at her. "Elena made me change the accounts," he gasped. "When I refused, she shot me." Then he collapsed at Luca's feet, clutching the only original report that bore Elena's 3-dot seal. Elena moved before anyone else. She caught Paul's shoulder as he fell and pressed both hands against the wound in his abdomen. Blood spread between her fingers, hot and frighteningly fast. "Call a doctor," she shouted. Adrian seized her wrist and pulled her away. "Don't touch the man you shot." "The bullet entered from his right side and traveled downward," Elena said. "If I had shot him face to face, the angle would be level or rising. He was either kneeling when someone fired, or the shooter stood above him." Luca ordered the family physician brought from the medical floor, then crouched beside Paul. "Who gave Elena access to the accounts?" Paul's eyelids fluttered. "I did. She said Mr. Moretti would kill my wife if I refused." His voice was weak, but every word landed cleanly. "She made me remove the 3-dot seals from the reports. When I tried to keep one original, she came to my apartment." Adrian held up the blood-covered embossing press. "There's your witness, your weapon, and her stolen authentication tool. How much more do you need?" Elena looked at Paul's hands. His right thumb and index finger were stained with blue correction ink, the color used only in the basement accounting department. He had been working that evening, not hiding at home as his statement implied. More importantly, Paul's wedding ring was missing. He had never removed it, not even while operating the paper cutter. A pale band marked the place where it had been. Someone had taken it because the ring carried the biometric key to the junior compliance terminal. "Paul," Elena said, keeping her voice low, "where is Rachel?" His eyes opened. Terror crossed his face before he forced it away. "You know where my wife is." Elena understood. Paul was not accusing her to save himself. Someone had his wife. Luca saw only the fear and interpreted it differently. "Get her away from him." The guards pulled Elena upright while the physician cut open Paul's shirt. The countdown showed 13 minutes and 9 seconds. Elena could no longer protect Paul by exposing what she had noticed. If she mentioned Rachel, whoever controlled the building would know their leverage had been identified. "Luca, let me show you what happened before the archive recording began." She nodded toward the terminal. "At 9:16 tonight, I was reconciling insurance payments from the East River construction sites. 4 reimbursements contained the same prime number spacing as the transfers on that screen. They were small enough to pass routine review, but all 4 returned to vendors sharing one dormant bank address. An address you controlled," Adrian said. "An address created before I came here." Elena kept her attention on Luca. "I tested whether it was an old bookkeeping error. It wasn't. Someone had been sending trial payments through the dormant route for 6 weeks, increasing the amount each time. The next scheduled transaction was $18 million. Luca's gaze hardened. "Why didn't you call me?" "I did." Elena asked the terminal to display the internal communication log. Her encrypted warning to Luca appeared at 9:42 p.m., marked delivered, and opened 31 seconds later. Luca examined the record. "I never saw this." Adrian immediately answered, "Because she created the message after the theft to manufacture an alibi." Elena opened the packet metadata. The warning had been routed to Luca's private office tablet, a device protected by his palm scan. At 9:43, the tablet had acknowledged the message from inside the executive conference room. Luca had been there with Adrian and 3 council members negotiating the harbor agreement. Any one of them could have seen him unlock it, but only Luca should have been able to open the encrypted attachment. "Who handled your tablet after the meeting?" Elena asked. Luca looked toward the far end of the table. His security chief, Victor Sloan, stood there with his hands folded behind his back. Victor had served Luca's father, survived 2 wars between families, and personally carried Luca out of the Newark ambush 14 years earlier. "I returned it to Mr. Moretti's office," Victor said. "It never left my possession." Elena remembered the 7-minute camera gap outside her office and felt the final pieces begin to align. Victor controlled the surveillance servers, the elevators, the evidence bags, and every guard who had searched her desk. He had also ordered the building's communication jammer activated before Luca commanded the lockdown. "What time did you activate the jammer?" she asked. Victor's expression did not change. "When the theft alarm sounded. The system log says the alarm sounded at 10:51. My warning failed to reach the external auditors at 10:37. Victor paused for less than a second. "The clock on your terminal could have been altered." It was a reasonable reply, but it came too quickly. Elena had not said which device recorded the failed message. Luca noticed the hesitation, but said nothing. She continued carefully. "When my warning to you went unanswered, I tried to send a verification request directly to the bank. The external line was already blocked. I had 2 choices: let the scheduled transaction execute or move the money into an internal quarantine account that no one could release without a second authorization. I chose the quarantine. And used Paul's credentials to do it," Luca said, "because mine had already been duplicated. Paul was the only accountant whose access had not touched the suspicious vendors. I asked him to meet me in the archive and witness the transfer." Paul groaned on the floor as the physician applied pressure around the wound. "She's lying," he whispered. "I never met her." Elena turned to him. The blue ink on his fingers had smeared onto the original report. Beneath the blood, she could see 4 hurried digits written along its torn edge. 4179. Paul moved his thumb over them before anyone else noticed. It was not an account number. It was the extension for Luca's sealed evidence room. Elena understood what Paul was trying to tell her, but Victor was watching her face. She forced herself to look confused. The physician announced that the bullet had missed Paul's liver, but that he would bleed to death without immediate surgery. Luca ordered the medical team to take him upstairs. Victor's men lifted the stretcher. As they passed Elena, Paul opened his eyes and whispered so softly that only she could hear, "They have Rachel below the chapel." Then Victor leaned down as if adjusting Paul's blanket. Paul's body suddenly convulsed. The heart monitor screamed. The physician shouted for epinephrine while Elena saw Victor slip an empty syringe beneath the stretcher. She lunged forward, but the guards restrained her. Victor looked directly at her, and in his calm expression she saw confirmation. He knew she had discovered the second man inside Adrian's conspiracy, and he intended to make sure she never reached extension 4179. Paul's heart monitor flattened before the medical team reached the elevator. The physician tore open the emergency case and began compressions while Victor stepped away from the stretcher with empty hands. Elena twisted against the guards. "Check beneath the blanket." He injected something into Paul's fore. Victor lifted the blanket himself. The empty syringe had vanished. "She's trying to blame everyone who can testify against her," he said. Paul's body jerked under the physician's hands, then went still. "He's gone." Rachel's location died with him unless Elena could reach the room below the chapel. She looked at Luca, hoping he had noticed Victor's movement. But Luca was staring at the dead man who had served his organization without complaint for 3 years. Elena had given him facts that could be disputed. Paul had given him blood, a witness statement, and a corpse. "Search her," Luca ordered. A female guard removed Elena's jacket, emptied her pockets, and found an access card wrapped inside a folded bank receipt. Elena had never seen the card before. Victor scanned it against the terminal. The screen identified it as a master key issued to Adrian's private financial office. The receipt showed a cash deposit of $200,000 made that afternoon into an account bearing Elena's name. "I didn't make that deposit," she said. Adrian's expression hardened with convincing disgust. "First she steals my access, then she places my name on the accounts." She intended us to destroy each other while she disappeared with the money. The female guard searched Elena's purse and produced a passport beside a one-way ticket to Buenos Aires, departing at 6 the next morning. Elena recognized the envelope. It had arrived at her apartment 2 days earlier, with no return address. She had assumed it contained documents for an international tax review and placed it unopened in her bag before coming to work. That ordinary mistake now looked like preparation for escape. Luca picked up the ticket. "You were leaving the country. I didn't know it was there." "You expect me to believe someone opened accounts in your name, copied your signature, duplicated your fingerprints, planted my brother's key on you, shot your employee, stole your press, purchased this ticket, and somehow knew exactly when you would carry the bag into this building?" "Yes," Elena said, "because none of those pieces were collected independently. Victor's men found every one of them." The council chamber became silent. Victor's gaze sharpened, but his voice remained measured. "My loyalty to the Moretti family began before you were born, Ms. Ward. Your control of its evidence began at the same time." Luca stepped between them. For one brief moment, Elena thought he might finally question the man who controlled the cameras and guards. Instead, he turned toward her. Enough. The word hurt more than the guard's blow had. During the last 6 months, Luca had never praised her, but he had listened when she spoke. He had learned to recognize the small red tabs she placed on dangerous contracts. He had called her at impossible hours because he trusted her to separate fear from fact. Once, after she saved the company payroll during a federal freeze, he told her that she was the only person in the building who never lied to make him comfortable. Now that trust was gone. "You studied my systems," Luca said. "You learned whom I protected, whom I doubted, and how my father built this organization. I mistook patience for loyalty, and I mistook your dependence on my work for respect." The words landed harder than Elena intended. Luca's jaw tightened. "Reverse the quarantine." "I can't." "You mean you won't?" "If I restore the money, it returns to the compromise settlement chain. Whoever armed the succession protocol will control it." Adrian pointed at the clock. "There are 8 minutes left. She's delaying until the funds disappear." Luca placed the terminal before her. "Reverse it now, and I will keep you alive until we verify the external records." Elena studied the command on the screen. The restoration path had changed. Instead of returning the money to the Moretti operating accounts, it now routed the entire $18 million through the succession trust naming Adrian. Someone had modified it within the last 4 minutes. If she obeyed, she would hand Adrian both the money and proof that Luca had authorized the transfer. If she refused, Luca would believe she had chosen the money over her life. Elena opened the emergency audit menu. "What are you doing?" Luca demanded. "Giving you time to learn that you're wrong." She activated the custodial freeze. The screen flashed red as all 12 accounts closed simultaneously. The $18 million moved into a regulated audit reserve that could not be accessed for 72 hours. Under federal banking rules, the person initiating the freeze became the temporary custodian. Elena's name appeared across the wall. Sole controlling custodian, Elena Ward. Adrian gave a hollow laugh. "There, she finally admits it. No one can withdraw the money," Elena said. "Not me, not Adrian, not even Luca. The reserve will release its full audit trail when the external network reconnects." Victor moved toward the communications panel. "Then we restore the network." Elena saw the trap before Luca did. The audit reserve required a living custodian to authenticate the release. If she died before reconnection, control passed to the succession beneficiary, Adrian. Victor did not intend to restore anything while she remained alive. "Don't let him take me downstairs," she told Luca. "Rachel Mercer is being held below the chapel. Paul gave me the room number before Victor killed him." Victor struck her across the mouth. Paul spoke no such words. Luca watched blood gather at Elena's lip, but he did not stop the guards when Victor ordered them to seize her. "Hold her in the lower security wing," Luca said. "At midnight, if the money has not returned, and Paul's wife is not beneath that chapel, carry out the council's sentence." Elena stared at him. "If you send Victor to search for Rachel, she'll be dead before he reports back. Take her." The guards dragged Elena into the service elevator. Victor entered behind them and pressed the button for the basement. As the doors closed, Elena saw Adrian place a brotherly hand on Luca's shoulder. The elevator descended 3 floors before Victor removed a suppressed pistol from beneath his jacket. "The council's sentence has been moved forward," he said. Elena drove her heel into the emergency brake, throwing the elevator sideways and knocking both guards against the wall. The pistol fired, shattering the control panel. Sparks filled the compartment. Elena seized the embossing press from Victor's evidence bag and smashed its steel handle across his wrist. The gun dropped into the shaft through the damaged doorway. Victor caught her by the throat, but Elena drove the press into the elevator's manual release and forced the doors apart as the car passed the chapel level. She threw herself through the opening, struck the concrete floor, and rolled into darkness. A second shot tore through her jacket as the elevator continued downward. Alarms erupted throughout the building. Behind her, Victor shouted that Elena Ward had murdered 2 guards and escaped with the master evidence key. Ahead, beneath the darkened chapel, a woman began screaming for help. Elena followed Rachel's screams through a narrow corridor beneath the chapel, while red emergency lights pulsed along the stone walls. The passage ended at a steel door secured with an electronic lock. She tried Adrian's master access card, but the reader rejected it and triggered a 30-second alarm. Through the door, Rachel screamed again. Elena examined the keypad and noticed 4 worn buttons: 4, 1, 7, and 9. The same digits Paul had written on the report. She entered them in the order he had given her. The lock released. Rachel Mercer was tied to a chair in the center of a storage chamber, an oxygen mask strapped over her mouth, and a pressure device fastened beneath the seat. A transparent tube ran from the device to a canister marked as medical oxygen, but the warning label had been deliberately replaced. Elena smelled bitter almonds and understood the canister contained poison gas. A digital timer beside Rachel showed 6 minutes. "Don't move," Elena warned. Rachel's wrists were wired to the pressure plate. If Elena cut the restraints or lifted her from the chair, the gas would release. She searched the chamber and found Paul's missing wedding ring beside a biometric scanner mounted on the wall. Victor's men had used it to enter the junior compliance terminal under Paul's identity, then left it here to be destroyed with Rachel. Elena pressed the ring against the scanner. A hidden cabinet opened, revealing printed bank records, cloned access cards, and 6 replacement gas canisters. Victor had turned the room beneath the chapel into an evidence workshop. Elena photographed nothing because her phone had been confiscated, and carrying the papers would slow them down. Instead, she used the steel embossing press she had taken from Victor and stamped her 3-dot mark into the corner of every document. Then she removed the maintenance panel beneath the pressure device. The wires were color-coded, but Elena did not pretend to understand explosives. She looked for the manufacturer's invoice number, found it engraved beside the battery, and recognized the supplier from the false construction accounts. The device was not a bomb. It was an industrial weight sensor used to measure concrete loads. The gas valve would open only if the chair became lighter by more than 40 pounds. Elena gathered 4 sealed boxes of financial records, calculated that their combined listed weight exceeded Rachel's, and stacked them across the chair before cutting the restraints. As Rachel stood, Elena transferred the boxes onto the seat one at a time. The pressure reading remained stable. The timer continued counting, but the valve stayed closed. "Can you walk?" Elena asked. Rachel nodded, though her legs trembled. "Paul told me to remember the old funeral tunnel. He said if anything happened, it led beneath the river warehouse." Elena took Paul's ring and 1 stamped bank record, then guided Rachel into the passage as the timer dropped below 4 minutes. Upstairs, the countdown in the council chamber reached 0. The $18 million did not return to the Moretti operating accounts. Instead, every company under Luca's control received an automatic suspension notice. Payroll froze, construction payments stopped, and 3 harbor shipments lost their insurance clearance. Within seconds, Luca's commanders began receiving calls from angry captains, unpaid soldiers, and union leaders threatening to abandon their contracts. Adrian stood before the council and invoked the emergency clause, allowing him to assume temporary command when Luca could no longer protect the family's assets. "Elena designed this collapse," Adrian said. "She knew the organization would turn on you when the money stopped. Give me authority for 72 hours and I will recover it." Luca looked at the empty place on the floor where Elena had been forced to kneel. Her words returned to him. I mistook your dependence on my work for respect. For 6 months, she had prevented every crisis from reaching this room. Now, less than 30 minutes after her removal, the organization was beginning to fracture. That alone did not prove innocence, but it exposed the first contradiction. A woman planning to steal $18 million would have transferred it somewhere she could spend it. Elena had placed it inside a regulated reserve that denied her access as completely as it denied Luca. She had sacrificed her only leverage to preserve the audit trail. The vote can wait, Luca said. Adrian's face tightened. Every minute costs us allies. Then we'll discover whether those allies belong to us or to our money. Luca ordered the physician brought back. Paul remained dead, but the 2 guards Victor claimed Elena had murdered in the elevator were alive. One had a fractured wrist, the other had suffered a concussion. Neither had been shot. Victor's report had been transmitted before the physician examined them, and it described both men as dead from gunshot wounds. That was the second contradiction. I received incorrect information during the pursuit, Victor explained. From whom? The elevator team. You were the elevator team. Victor held Luca's gaze. Then I made an error under pressure. Victor Sloan had coordinated executions during gunfire without confusing a broken wrist for a bullet wound. Luca said nothing. He picked up the blood-stained report Paul had carried and saw 4 numbers along its torn edge. Victor moved closer before Luca spoke. A meaningless calculation. Luca looked at him. I didn't ask what it was. Victor stopped. That was the third contradiction. He knew the numbers mattered before Luca revealed them. Luca concealed his realization and turned toward Adrian. Elena said the audit reserve would release when the external network reconnects. I want the jammer disabled. That could expose every internal account, Adrian warned. Then we'll reconnect only the evidence room line, extension 4179. Luca watched Adrian's eyes flick briefly toward Victor. It lasted less than a second. Prepare the council vote, Luca added. If the reserve does not open in 5 minutes, I'll authorize your temporary command. Adrian relaxed, believing he had won. Luca left the chamber and ordered his most trusted independent guard, Daniel Reyes, to monitor the evidence room without alerting Victor. 90 seconds later, Daniel reported that Victor had entered extension 4179 carrying an incendiary device. Luca had told only Adrian which extension would reconnect. The brother he had defended his entire life had passed the information directly to the man destroying the evidence. Luca ordered Daniel to arrest Victor quietly, but an explosion shook the lower floor before the command reached him. Flames consumed the evidence room, and Victor disappeared through the chapel stairwell. Luca ran downstairs with 3 guards who had served him before Victor became security chief. Beneath the chapel, they found the poisoned canister, Rachel's severed restraints, and a chair weighted with boxes. The documents inside the hidden cabinet were already burning from a second incendiary charge, but one sheet lay outside the flames. 3 raised dots marked its corner. Luca touched Elena's unmistakable seal. A second mark had been pressed into the stone beside the tunnel entrance, then another farther inside. Elena had known Victor would destroy the records. She had carried the only physical authentication tool he could not digitally duplicate, and she was using it to leave a trail through the darkness. Luca followed the marks until the tunnel divided beneath the river. On the left wall, Elena had stamped 3 dots. On the right, there was only blood. Then Luca heard a gunshot echo from the passage Elena had deliberately left unmarked. He understood immediately. The seals were not showing him where she had gone. They were leading Victor away from Rachel. Luca drew his weapon and entered the corridor marked by blood, knowing Elena had once again protected his people after he had publicly sentenced her to death. Luca followed the blood through the unmarked corridor until the stone passage opened into an abandoned pump chamber beneath the East River. Rusted machinery filled the room, and black water surged behind 3 steel floodgates. Elena stood on a maintenance platform above the channel, with one arm wrapped around her ribs. A bullet had grazed her left shoulder, tearing her blouse and leaving blood down her sleeve. Victor waited below her with a pistol aimed at Rachel, who was trapped against the far railing. "Put your weapon down, Luca," Victor called. "Elena dies if I hear the safety move." Luca kept the pistol lowered, but did not release it. "You served my father for 23 years. Your father understood that loyalty has a price. You expected it for free." Victor ordered Elena to throw Paul's ring and the stamped bank record into the water. She held both in her uninjured hand. If I destroy them, Adrian still needs me alive to release the audit reserve. Not anymore. At 12:01, the council recognized him as acting successor. Your death transfers custodial control to the authorized family beneficiary. Luca felt the consequence of his own order with brutal clarity. He had not merely delivered Elena to her executioner. By publicly sentencing her, he had given Adrian legal grounds to classify her death as enforcement rather than murder. Rachel isn't part of this, Elena said. Let her walk to Luca, and I'll give you the ring. Victor motioned Rachel forward. She crossed half the platform before he raised his pistol toward Elena. Luca fired first. His bullet struck the railing beside Victor's wrist, forcing the shot wide. Elena drove the steel embossing press into the emergency control lever. A floodgate dropped between Rachel and Victor, but the impact fractured a corroded pipe overhead. River water exploded into the chamber. Victor fired through the bars while Luca pulled Rachel behind a concrete support. Elena jumped from the platform onto the lower maintenance stairs, landing hard enough to buckle one knee. She still held the ring and document. "The southern gate," she shouted. "Close it, before the intake pressure reaches 60. Luca saw 3 identical controls. Which one? The valve with the replacement plate. The maintenance company charged us twice for it last winter. Luca found the newer brass plate and turned the wheel. For most of his life, people had waited for his orders. Now he obeyed Elena without hesitation. The southern gate descended, diverting the water away from Rachel, but sealing Victor and Elena inside the same compartment. Victor lunged for her. Elena ducked beneath his injured arm and slammed the embossing press into the knuckles holding his gun. The weapon fell into the rising water. Victor caught her by the wounded shoulder and drove her against the gate. Luca could not shoot through the steel bars without risking Elena. "Open the center intake," she gasped. "It'll drown both of you. Only if you leave it open." Luca understood what she was asking. She trusted his timing less than she trusted the machinery, but she had no other option. He opened the intake. A violent current tore Victor away from Elena and dragged him toward the drainage channel. Luca counted 3 seconds, then forced the wheel closed. Elena caught the railing. Victor seized a maintenance chain and pulled himself through a narrow overflow hatch before Luca could reach him. He disappeared toward the river warehouse, leaving a trail of blood in the water. Luca raised the gate and crossed to Elena. When he reached for her shoulder, she stepped away. "Don't. You're bleeding. I was bleeding when you ordered Victor to take me downstairs." Luca's hand fell. Rachel stood behind him, shaking but alive. "Paul tried to warn us," she said. "Victor took me before Paul's shift ended. They told him I would be killed if he didn't accuse Elena. He thought Luca would investigate after the countdown." Her voice broke. He didn't know Victor would poison him. Luca accepted the accusation without defending himself. "Did Paul tell you what Adrian wanted?" Elena asked. Rachel nodded. "Not everything. He said Adrian needed Luca removed before the municipal bond renewal tomorrow night. Once Adrian controls the legitimate companies, he can pledge the construction assets to a private lender. The lender is really a group of shell companies. The 12 hidden accounts," Elena said. "He isn't only stealing $18 million. He's using it as proof of liquidity to borrow against the entire Moretti corporate network." Luca finally understood the scale. Adrian had created the accounts before Elena arrived, then arranged for the dead Baltimore accountant's partner to recommend her. Her expertise was not an obstacle Adrian had failed to predict. It was the centerpiece of his defense. When the theft was exposed, the family would blame the one woman capable of designing it. "Why use his own name as beneficiary?" Luca asked. Elena handed him the stamped bank record. "Because these are succession trusts, not ordinary accounts. Only a legal Moretti heir can control them after your death or removal. Adrian couldn't hide his identity from the banks, so he hid the accounts from you. Once the asset transfer is complete tomorrow night, he'll dissolve the trusts through the lender and erase the connection. Then this proves he controls them. It proves his name appears on one internal record. Adrian will say I manufactured it with the press, just as he did upstairs. We need independent proof that he knowingly created the accounts and ordered the transfer." Luca looked at Paul's ring. The biometric history. Connection, not intent. Paul's access can establish that Victor cloned credentials, but it won't prove Adrian gave the order. Rachel said Paul had mentioned a paper authorization stored outside Moretti headquarters. He never learned where it was, only that Victor called it the father's insurance. Luca suspected it referred to a private agreement Adrian had made with the shell lender using their father's succession charter as collateral. Without that document, Adrian could still portray Victor as a rogue security chief who framed them both. A warning sounded through the tunnel. Victor had activated the river warehouse's fire suppression pumps, and foam began pouring into the corridor behind them. Within minutes, the chemicals would erase blood, fingerprints, and residue from the evidence workshop. Elena led them through the funeral tunnel, while Luca supported Rachel. She remembered the route from old construction invoices she had once corrected after discovering the family had paid to repair a passage no city map acknowledged. They emerged inside an abandoned crematorium, 2 blocks from the river warehouse. Luca's phone recovered a signal as soon as they cleared the jammer's range. 37 missed calls appeared. The last message came from Adrian. The council has voted. Sign the transfer of corporate authority at tomorrow night's Founders Gala, or every Moretti company enters receivership at 9. Come alone. Elena Ward remains condemned. Luca showed Elena the message. He expects me to fight the transfer. Then don't. You want me to give him the empire? I want you to make him believe you still blame me, and that Victor destroyed the only evidence. Adrian won't bring the original lending agreement out of hiding unless he believes the signature ceremony is safe. Luca studied her face. You expect to work with me after what I did? No, Elena said. I expect to use the access your name provides. Working with you would require trust. The distinction struck him harder than an insult. He removed his jacket and placed it on a nearby table instead of trying to drape it over her shoulders. Tell me what you need. Elena tore a clean strip from the lining and bound her wound herself. Then she handed Luca Paul's ring. Return to the council. Tell Adrian I escaped after murdering Victor. Announce that you'll sign tomorrow night, and make the entire city believe you still intend to execute me when I'm found. And what will you do? Elena looked toward the old crematorium doors as sirens approached the river warehouse. Find the account Adrian believes no one else knows exists. Luca received another message before he could answer. It contained a photograph taken less than a minute earlier. Elena, Rachel, and Luca standing together inside the crematorium. Beneath it were 6 words. The alliance ends before sunrise, or Rachel dies.